I never thought my obsession with photography would lead me here, into a place where light dies and shadows breathe. What started as a casual detour on my trip to Peru turned into the most harrowing experience of my life. I'm not exaggerating when I say I've seen things in these tunnels that make me question reality itself. Things that still echo in my dreams. Things that listen when you breathe. Before we start, I need you to do one thing for me. Tell me in the comments which country and city you're watching from. And remember, if you've ever thought about exploring somewhere forbidden, this story might change your mind forever. It was my second week in Lima. I had come here chasing vibrant street photography, colonial architecture, and the golden sunsets that painted the Pacific. But when I overheard two local guides at a cafe talking about los túneles prohibidos, my curiosity lit up. Apparently, under the city's historic center lies a labyrinth of catacombs, some open to tourists, others sealed for centuries. The closed sections, they said, were far deeper and far older than the official maps suggested. I should have left it at that, another piece of trivia for my travel journal. But my mind works differently. If there's a locked door, I want to know what's behind it. If there's a path marked "Do Not Enter," I need to see where it leads. So I asked around. That's how I met Raul. Raul was not an official guide. He was a thin man in his 40s with weathered skin and the type of gaze that made you feel like he'd seen things he wished he could unsee. He wore a faded soccer jersey and carried a flashlight that looked older than me. "You want the real catacombs?" he asked, lowering his voice. "The ones that aren't on the postcards?" I nodded, trying to mask my excitement. "You bring good shoes, no bright clothes, and cash. We leave before sunrise. And one more thing, no matter what you hear down there, you do not wander away from me." The morning we left, Lima was still asleep. The streets were empty except for the distant rumble of a garbage truck. Raul led me through narrow alleys until we reached a small unmarked door behind an abandoned colonial church. The door groaned as he unlocked it, revealing a steep staircase swallowed in darkness. A damp, earthy smell rose from below, laced with something metallic, like old blood. We descended slowly, our footsteps crunching on centuries of dust. At first, it was just stone walls and low ceilings, lit by the jittery beam of Raul's flashlight. The air grew cooler, heavier. I could hear faint drippings somewhere far ahead, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. We passed ossuaries, rooms stacked floor to ceiling with bones. Femurs lined the walls like bricks. Skulls stared from niches, their hollow sockets catching the light. I took photos, my hands trembling, not from fear yet, but from the sheer weight of history pressing in on me. "This is still tourist area," Raul said, whispering. "Pretty for pictures. But further down, no one comes." The official catacombs ended at a heavy iron gate. Beyond it, the stone was darker, rougher. The walls seemed to sweat. Raul unlocked the gate with a key that looked like it belonged to a dungeon. The change was immediate. The air was thicker, almost warm, and the smell, the metallic tang, was stronger here. I thought it might be rust until I realized it smelled too much like blood. We walked for what felt like an hour. The tunnels twisted unpredictably, some narrowing so much I had to turn sideways. The dripping sound grew louder, but now it wasn't steady. It came in bursts, like something moving in rhythm with us. At one point, Raul stopped abruptly and raised his hand. His flashlight beam danced over a patch of wall ahead of us. It looked wrong. The stone wasn't flat. It was bulging slightly, with a strange texture, almost like scar tissue. Before I could ask, the bulge shivered. I froze. Raul grabbed my arm and whispered, "Keep moving." His voice was tight, urgent. We didn't speak for the next 20 minutes. The deeper we went, the more the architecture changed. The arches gave way to jagged rock, the floor sloped down, and the air became humid, almost suffocating. My shirt clung to my back. I started hearing other sounds now, faint, irregular clicks, like fingernails tapping stone. Once I thought I'd heard a low, throaty hum. Raúl never looked back, never slowed down. Finally, we entered a cavernous chamber. My flashlight barely touched the edges of the space. In the center, there was a pit, perfectly circular, its walls slick with moisture. I leaned over, shining my light inside. The beam only reached a few meters before being swallowed by darkness. Then something moved. It was fast, too fast to register, just a ripple in the blackness, followed by the faintest splash. I stumbled back. Raúl's hand gripped my shoulder. He said, "We go now. You've seen enough." We retraced our steps, but the tunnels felt different on the way back. Narrower, less familiar. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I heard it. A sound behind us. Wet, heavy, like something dragging itself across stone. I turned, but my flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, I heard breathing, deep, animalistic, but somehow deliberate. Raúl didn't say a word. He just grabbed my wrist and pulled me faster. The dragging sound followed. By the time we reached the iron gate, I was drenched in sweat. Raúl slammed it shut and locked it, pressing his back against it as if holding something inside. "Do not come back here," he said. His eyes weren't just serious, they were terrified. I wanted to ask what was in there, but deep down I already knew it wasn't something that could be explained in words. That night, back in my hotel, I went through the photos I had taken. Most were of bones and stone corridors, but in one frame, just one, there was something else. A pale shape, crouched in the corner of a tunnel. Long limbs folded awkwardly, head tilted too far to be human. And the worst part? Its eyes were open.
I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that crouched figure from the photo, those wide, reflective eyes staring straight at the lens, straight at me. My mind kept replaying the way it must have been there the whole time, just watching. By morning, the streets of Lima felt wrong. The sun was bright, the air was warm, but every shadow seemed too deep, every alley too narrow. I caught myself glancing behind me more than once. I tried to convince myself not to go back. I told myself I had enough photographs, enough of a story. But the truth was, the photo had hooked me. That thing in the tunnel wasn't a trick of the light, and I couldn't leave without knowing what it was. I found Raúl near the same cafe where we'd met. He didn't look happy to see me. "You didn't delete the pictures, did you?" he asked, without greeting. I shook my head. His jaw tightened. "Then it knows you." I laughed, nervously, hoping he was joking. He wasn't. His expression didn't change. "I'll pay double," I said quickly. "Just take me down there again." He shook his head. "No, the tunnels are not the same twice. They shift. And it's not just the walls, it's the thing inside. You were lucky last time." "Then I'll bring more lights, more batteries." Raúl stepped closer, his voice low. "More light won't help you if it wants you in the dark." It took me the rest of the day to find someone else willing to go. The man's name was Mateo, a younger guide, maybe mid-20s, with an easy smile and a backpack full of climbing gear. Unlike Raúl, he didn't seem afraid. He said, "I've been in the closed catacombs twice. Never saw anything weird, just rats and old bones. But if you want to go deep, we'll need ropes and masks. The air can get bad down there." We agreed to meet before dawn again. The second descent felt different. With Mateo leading, the path didn't match my memory. The initial stairwell was the same, but the corridors twisted into shapes I didn't recognize. Even the ossuaries seemed rearranged, the skull stacks leaning at different angles. I kept checking behind us, half expecting to see that pale shape following, but there was nothing, just the hollow drip of water. After an hour, we reached a section where the walls narrowed until we had to squeeze sideways. The air here was warmer, thicker. My headlamp beam caught movement, a fat, pale centipede sliding into a crack in the stone. "Smell that?" Mateo asked, pausing. It was faint but distinct, an acrid stench, like ammonia and rotting meat. "That means we're close to the deep chambers," he said. I didn't ask what made the smell. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The corridor opened into a small chamber. The walls here weren't stone anymore. They were some kind of calcified texture, pitted and irregular, almost like coral. My fingertips brushed over them and came away with a thin, oily residue. Mateo was setting up a rope on the far side, where a vertical shaft plunged into darkness. "These drops about 12 meters. Once we're down, we'll be in a part no one maps." I clipped into the rope and followed him. The descent was slow, the air growing cooler as we went down. My boots touched uneven ground at the bottom, damp, slick. The tunnel ahead was low enough that we had to crouch. My knees ached as we moved forward. The sound of dripping water was louder now, but the drops didn't echo. They were muffled, as if hitting something soft. My headlamp passed over something on the ground. At first I thought it was a pile of cloth. Then I realized it was a human skeleton, the bones discolored to a sickly yellow. The skull's jaw was broken, hanging at an unnatural angle. Mateo didn't stop. He just said quietly, "There are more." And there were. Dozens, scattered along the tunnel. Some intact, others crushed into fragments. None looked fresh, but none looked ancient either. We reached another chamber. This one was larger, with a ceiling so low in places I had to duck. The floor was covered in a thin layer of water that lapped at my boots. In the center was a mound. No, not a mound. A heap of bones, stacked deliberately, almost like a nest. Mateo raised his light toward the far wall, and that's when I saw it. It was crouched against the rock, half hidden in shadow. Long, sinewy limbs, skin the color of candle wax stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Its head was elongated, with no visible nose, just two deep hollows where eyes should be. Except the eyes were there, glassy, wet, reflecting our lights like an animal caught in headlights. It didn't move first, just stared. Then it unfolded itself, rising higher than I thought possible, its joints bending in ways that made my stomach knot. Mateo swore under his breath. "Back up, slowly." We stepped backward, the water rippling around our ankles. The thing moved too, but I couldn't hear footsteps, only the slosh of displaced water and the occasional scrape against stone. The tunnel forked. Mateo took the left without hesitation. I followed, heart pumping so hard it felt like my vision was pulsing. Behind us, that wet sound grew louder. We reached the vertical shaft. Mateo clipped to the rope first, climbing fast. I waited below, the beam of my headlamp aimed back into the tunnel. The thing stopped just at the edge of the light. Its head tilted again. Slowly, it reached one long arm forward, fingertips grazing the water. Then it crouched low, and I realized it wasn't afraid of us. It was waiting. I climbed, every muscle burning. When I pulled myself over the edge, Mateo was already packing the rope. We didn't stop moving until we were back at the ossuaries. My legs felt like lead. My lungs ached from the damp air. When we finally emerged into the early morning light, I turned to look at the church door we'd come through. Mateo locked it without a word. His hands were shaking. Neither of us spoke on the walk back, but as we parted, he said one thing over his shoulder. It followed us last time too.
For the rest of that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me. Not in the literal sense. I never saw anyone following me, but in the way the air changes when you're not alone, the prickling between the shoulder blades, the heaviness in your chest. Lima's streets were busy, but somehow the crowd didn't help. In fact, it made me more paranoid. Anyone could be watching. Anyone could be hiding something under a hood, behind dark sunglasses. But the worst part was knowing that anyone didn't have to be human. I tried to lose myself in the noise of the city. I ate at a small ceviche stall near the coast, wandered the Plaza Mayor with my camera, even pretended to be a tourist again. But at some point in the afternoon, as I reviewed my photos, my stomach turned. One picture, a shot of the plaza's fountain, had something wrong in the background. Near the edge of the frame, under the shadow of a colonnade, was a pale shape. It wasn't clear, not like the tunnel photo, but the outline, the posture. I told myself it was a trick of light, a glare, but my hands were already trembling. By nightfall, I was back in my hotel room, curtains drawn tight. I kept the lights low, thinking that maybe if I stayed in shadow, whatever was out there wouldn't see me. That's when I heard it. Not loud, just a faint, irregular tap against the glass, like someone lightly drumming their fingers on the glass. My room was on the 4th floor. I froze, staring at the curtain. The tapping stopped. Then, slowly, I stepped forward and pulled the fabric aside, just an inch. Nothing. The street lamps below cast a yellow glow over empty pavement. No movement, no shape. But when I looked down at the glass itself, I saw them. 4 smudges. Long, thin streaks, as if fingertips had pressed and slid slowly downward. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window all night, eyes fixed on the street. At some point just before dawn, I thought I saw something slip into an alley across from the hotel, a pale blur, too fast to focus on. The next morning, I called Mateo. He answered on the second ring, voice hoarse. "I told you not to go back." I asked him if he thought it was following me. He was silent. "Mateo." Finally, he said, "I don't think, I know." We met in a small park near the edge of the historic district. Mateo looked worse than I felt, eyes bloodshot, skin pale like he hadn't slept either. "It doesn't always stay underground," he said. "Sometimes it comes up through drains, basements, old wells. It can move where it wants, if it knows the way." "And now it knows me?" He nodded once. I told him about the tapping at my window. He listened without interrupting, his gaze scanning the park. "It likes to test its prey," he said. "It will get closer each time, see how you react. If you run, it will chase. If you hide, it will wait." I felt my mouth go dry. "So what am I supposed to do? Leave the country?" "That might not matter," he said. "If it's marked you." He let the sentence die.
We agreed to meet again that evening to plan something. I'm not sure either of us knew exactly what. But for the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the sensation that the city itself had turned hostile. Every sound felt
amplified. The rumble of traffic under the street sounded too much like that wet dragging in the tunnels. The smell of fish from the markets carried the same sour tang of decay. And then there were the drains. I started noticing them everywhere. Grates in the sidewalks, open gutters along the curbs. I'd never paid attention to them before, but now each one felt like a potential doorway. And in some, I thought I saw moisture glistening too thickly to be just water. That night, the power went out in my hotel. At first, I thought it was a citywide outage, but when I looked outside, the other buildings were lit. My floor, however, was dark. I grabbed my flashlight. The hallway was empty, silent. Then I heard it, faint but close. A wet, rhythmic sound, somewhere below me. I hesitated at the stairwell, aiming the beam down. The concrete steps glistened. There was a smell rising with the damp air, metallic and sharp. Blood. I retreated to my room and locked the door, wedging a chair under the handle. The light from my flashlight threw long, shaky shadows on the walls. Then came the sound again, not from the hallway this time, from the bathroom. The drain. It started as a gurgle, then a slow, sucking noise. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer. The water in the shower drain was swirling, not down, but up. The surface bulged, like something was pushing from underneath. And then I saw them. Two small, glossy reflections just below the waterline. Eyes. I backed out of the bathroom, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. The flashlight slipped from my hand, rolling under the bed. In the dark, I heard the water spill over. Something slid out, wet and heavy, onto the tiles. I didn't wait to see it. I grabbed my bag and bolted, running barefoot down the hall, down the stairs, out into the street. The night air was cold against my sweat-soaked skin. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away. I spent the rest of the night in a 24-hour cafe, nursing bitter coffee and watching the door. Mateo found me there just before sunrise. He didn't look surprised when I told him what happened. "We can't stay in the city," he said simply. "It knows every corner here. We have to take you somewhere it can't follow." "Where?" I asked. He hesitated and then said, "Back down." I don't know how long I sat there, staring into the shadows that seemed to thicken with every blink. My flashlight's beam cut through the dust in the air, revealing flakes of rust drifting like ash from the ceiling. The silence in the tunnel was heavy, like it had weight, pressing down on my chest, making every breath feel stolen. Then, somewhere deep in the darkness, a sound rose. Not footsteps, not machinery. It was whispering. At first, it was faint, so faint that I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I strained my ears, it became clearer. Many voices, speaking at once, overlapping. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence, like the soft rush of water over stones. I told myself it was the wind moving through the tunnels, just the wind. But then I realized something. There was no draft. The air down here was still, stagnant and suffocating. The whispers seemed to grow closer, and I could almost feel them brushing against my ears, as if someone were leaning over my shoulder. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight across the walls. Nothing, just brick and rot. And then, movement. A shadow darted across the far end of the tunnel. It was fast, impossibly fast, and it didn't move like a person. Its shape shifted as it passed the light, like smoke caught in a sudden gust. My chest tightened, and I found myself stepping backward without realizing it. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed was worse. From the darkness, something scraped against the wall. A slow, deliberate drag, metal on brick. I aimed the flashlight at the sound, and that's when I saw it. A hand. But it wasn't right. It was pale, too pale. The skin stretched thin over long, uneven fingers. The nails were cracked and jagged, scraping sparks against the brick. The rest of it was hidden in the shadows, but the hand alone was enough to freeze me in place. I tried to speak, to say anything, but my voice was gone. My throat was locked. The hand withdrew slowly, curling into the darkness like it had never been there at all. And then the whispers returned, louder this time, closer. I didn't think, I just ran. My boots pounded against the damp concrete, and the tunnel seemed endless. I could hear them following me, not footsteps, but the sound of something sliding just beyond the reach of my light. Every turn I took, the whispers were already there, waiting for me, as if they knew where I was going before I did. When I finally saw the rusted metal ladder leading back to the surface, I didn't slow down. I grabbed the rungs, my hands slipping on the wet steel, and climbed as fast as I could. The whispers rose into a fever pitch, and I could swear I felt cold fingers brushing my ankles. I didn't look down. I didn't want to see what might be looking back. When I pushed the hatch open and the night air hit my face, I collapsed on the ground, gasping, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I listened, really listened, but there was nothing, just the sound of the wind in the grass. Still, I knew I wasn't alone.
The night after I fled that room, sleep was a cruel joke. Every creak of the hotel, every distant siren, every whisper of wind pressed against my nerves like a slow, grinding torture. My mind replayed every detail, every shadow, every wet scrape echoing behind me in the tunnels. The pale hand that vanished as if it was never there haunted my thoughts. I felt hunted, preyed upon by something that wasn't just beneath the city, but was creeping closer, maybe already beside me. I knew I couldn't stay in that room, in that hotel, not with whatever this was lurking so near, invisible yet suffocating. When I called Mateo, his voice was grim and weary, like he'd been expecting the worst. "We have to go back," he said without hesitation. "Not just the catacombs near the church, the deeper tunnels, the ones no one goes near. If we don't find its origin, it will keep hunting you. And whoever or whatever this is, it's ancient." I wanted to argue, to tell him I was done, but I wasn't. I had to know. Answers were the only way I could find peace, or at least try. We met just before dawn, near an abandoned warehouse by the port. The place smelled of salt, rust, and forgotten history. Mateo came prepared. Thick climbing ropes, gas masks, waterproof flashlights with spare batteries, and something I didn't recognize but hoped I'd never need, a small metal canister that hissed faintly when shaken. We slipped through a rusted hatch hidden beneath an old cargo container, descending into the forgotten underbelly of Lima, far beneath the catacombs and tunnels I'd seen before. The air grew colder, wetter, more oppressive with every step. The walls of the tunnel were slick, coated in a black, tar-like substance that seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. The pungent smell of decay was stronger here, choking and metallic. My flashlight flickered, casting uneasy shadows as Mateo led the way, his boots splashing through shallow puddles of stagnant water that reflected the weak light. After what felt like hours, we entered a massive cavern. The ceiling arched high above us, dripping with condensation. The walls throbbed faintly, as if breathing, pulsing with a sickling rhythm that set my nerves on edge. Scattered across the cavern floor were bones, fresh,
Broken ribs, fragments of skull, yellowed teeth. Nothing ancient. Something had been feeding down here, recently. Who or what? I whispered, feeling cold fingers of dread run down my spine. Mateo's face was grim. Something alive. Something that hunts in the dark. The whispering started again. Not the soft voices I'd heard before, but harsher, more guttural. It bounced off the cavern walls like a chant, alien and menacing. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath us, a low rumble vibrating through the stone. Mateo grabbed my arm. We need to move. Now. The passage forked into 3 tunnels. Without hesitation, Mateo chose the narrowest one, sloping sharply downward. The air grew colder still. Even with gas masks, the scent of rot and something fouler burned my lungs. The tunnel ended in a chamber lit by eerie phosphorescent fungi, clinging to the walls, bathing everything in a ghostly green light. In the center was a monstrous nest, woven of bones, tangled hair, and thick, fibrous material I couldn't identify. The nest seemed alive, subtly shifting as if breathing. I stepped closer. The walls pulsated with the same rhythm as the nest. It was like standing inside a beating heart made of stone and shadow. Suddenly, the nest stirred. A shape uncurled, a creature coiled tight, still, yet unmistakably alive. My light caught 2 eyes, black, glossy, unblinking, filled with ancient intelligence. I froze. Terror rooted me to the spot. Mateo's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. We don't want to hurt you. Just tell us why you're here. The creature responded with a wet, almost mournful sound. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. From the shadows came a vibration, a low pulse that resonated deep inside my chest. Mateo gripped my arm, urgency in his eyes. We have to leave, now. I tore my gaze away and fled. Outside, dawn was breaking, washing the city in pale light. The streets were waking up, unaware of the nightmare lurking beneath. But I was awake, and I knew this was just the beginning.
The days after that night felt like I was trapped between 2 worlds, the waking and the dreaming, where shadows stretched too long and silence screamed in my ears. Sleep became a stranger. When it did come, it brought with it fragmented visions of ancient tunnels, wet walls pulsating like a heartbeat, and those black, glassy eyes that refused to blink. Mateo and I kept our conversations brief, weighed down by exhaustion and the growing dread that whatever we'd awakened was far beyond our understanding. The city around us went on, oblivious to the horrors lurking beneath its streets. But every time I looked down a sewer grate or past an old well, I felt watched, as if the earth itself was breathing just beneath the surface. Determined to find answers, I buried myself in the musty archives of Lima's oldest libraries, poring over faded manuscripts and maps long forgotten. What I found chilled me to the bone. Beneath the colonial catacombs, stretching far beyond the reaches of any modern map, lay an ancient labyrinth constructed by the civilizations that predated even the Incas. These tunnels weren't just passageways, they were sacred sites used for rituals and worship of gods whose names were lost to time. Local legends spoke of something called el aliento, the breath, a force said to dwell in the deepest tunnels, a living presence born from the earth's own pain and anger. It was not a ghost or a demon, but something primal and ancient, a protector of the subterranean world, punishing those who dared to disrupt the sacred balance. Mateo had uncovered similar tales, whispered among the oldest residents, stories of explorers who entered those depths and never returned. With this grim knowledge, we prepared for another descent. This time we brought tools to mark our path. Chalk, string, anything that could help us find our way back if the tunnels decided to shift or trap us. The deeper we went, the more the air grew thick and oppressive, each breath tasting of damp earth and decay. The darkness was absolute, swallowing our flashlight beams like a hungry maw. The whispers returned almost immediately, but they felt different, sentient, reactive, as if the tunnels themselves were alive and aware of our intrusion. Sometimes the voices spoke in an ancient tongue I couldn't decipher. Other times they were agonized moans and plaintive sighs that sent shivers down my spine. At one point we came upon a vast cavern. Its walls were etched with intricate glyphs and symbols, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Mateo studied the carvings carefully. "These aren't just markings," he said softly. "They tell a story of guardians born from the earth itself, twisted by time and trapped by forgotten curses." I felt a cold dread settle over me. So the creature we saw, it's not evil, it's imprisoned. Before Mateo could respond, a low, earth-shaking roar echoed through the tunnels. The ground trembled violently beneath our feet, dust and debris raining down. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with menace. We ran blindly, guided only by instinct and the faint glow of our flashlights. Behind us, the whispers rose into a cacophony of rage and despair. When we finally emerged near an old disused well, Mateo gasped for breath. "This place, it's alive, and it's furious." I nodded, feeling the weight of what we'd uncovered pressing down on me like the crushing darkness of the tunnels. We hadn't just found a monster, we'd disturbed something ancient and sacred, something that was as much a part of the earth as the stones and soil themselves. And it was angry.
After that harrowing day near the abandoned well, nothing was the same. The thin veil separating the world I knew from the darkness beneath the city had worn away thread by thread. Every sound, every flicker of light, every passing shadow whispered the same chilling message. The tunnels were no longer just beneath Lima, they were inside me. I tried to cling to normalcy. I wandered the sunlit streets, trying to drown out the memories with the chatter of market vendors and the smell of roasted coffee. I spoke to strangers in cafes, forcing myself to laugh and smile. But the weight of unseen eyes followed me relentlessly, as if the darkness had somehow attached itself to my skin. Nightfall was worse. The walls of my hotel room no longer felt solid. They breathed in and out, expanding and contracting like the lungs of some giant beast. The shadows cast by the flickering street lamp outside twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and pulse. And then there were the whispers. At first, soft and distant, like wind rustling through dry leaves. But they soon grew into something urgent, pressing directly against my thoughts. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were words, phrases, fragments of a language that twisted my tongue and gnawed at my sanity. The voice inside my head was relentless. It promised secrets, knowledge forbidden and ancient. It threatened pain and despair. It pulled at my memories, warping the faces of people I loved into those monstrous forms from the tunnels. I could no longer tell my past from my nightmares. Sleep became a battlefield. Every night I fought off visions that spilled beyond the edges of dreams. Faces, pale, expressionless, emerged from the corners of my vision, eyes black and soulless. Hands dripping with something dark and wet reached out from walls, floors, even ceilings. I'd whip my head around, heart hammering, but find nothing but the cold, empty room. Mateo noticed. He said the tunnels weren't just physical. They were alive, and their influence could seep into your mind, driving you to madness. The deeper you go, he warned, the more it becomes a part of you. Not just the place, but the fear, the darkness, the whispers. Desperation made me agree to something I never believed in, a ritual. We had found symbols etched in the cavern walls, fragments of an ancient language. Mateo had translated enough to hint at a way to bind or at least appease the entity haunting me. The night we tried the ritual, the air was thick and cold. We cleared a space on the floor and drew a circle of salt. Around it, we placed candles, flickering weakly in the stale air. Strips of cloth marked with the glyphs lay scattered, their symbols glowing faintly in the candlelight. Our voices trembled as we chanted words foreign to our tongues, phrases twisted by time and loss. At first, nothing responded. The silence was suffocating, broken only by our ragged breaths. Then, the temperature plummeted. The flames bent and warped, casting monstrous shadows that danced on the walls. The whispers exploded into a deafening roar, echoing from every corner of the building. The floor trembled beneath our feet as if the very earth was waking up. From the flickering shadows emerged an apparition, a grotesque, writhing mass with black, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through me. Its presence pressed on my chest like a weight, crushing the air from my lungs. The scent of decay and damp stone filled my nostrils. Mateo grabbed my arm with a fierce grip. "Hold on! Don't let it in!" I clenched my fists, fighting against the crushing darkness that sought to drown my mind. The air around us thickened, like wading through invisible sludge, threatening to pull me under. When the ritual finally ended, the room was silent, and the oppressive weight lifted. But something inside me had shifted irrevocably. The cracks between the world above and the tunnels below had torn wide open inside my mind. I couldn't tell if the creeping madness was the creature reaching out through the shadows or my own mind, fracturing under the relentless pressure. Every moment was a struggle between holding on to who I was and succumbing to the darkness that promised to swallow me whole.
The days that followed the ritual felt like living in a waking nightmare. The borders between reality and hallucination blurred until I wasn't sure which was which anymore. Faces appeared at the edges of my vision, some human, some twisted beyond recognition, their black, empty eyes burning with something ancient and terrible. Shadows stretched and shifted with a life of their own, and the incessant whispering echoed inside my skull like a relentless storm. Mateo and I both knew that the creature beneath Lima's catacombs was no longer content to remain hidden in the depths. It was reaching out, through the cracks in the earth, through the fissures in my mind, seeping into the world above like a poison. Our decision was desperate but clear. We would return to the tunnels one last time, not just to observe, but to confront the source of this terror. Armed with all the knowledge we had gathered, with chants whispered under our breath and talismans in our hands, we prepared ourselves to face the unknown. The descent was worse than before. The air thickened, cold and heavy, as if the tunnels themselves were closing in on us. Our footsteps echoed hollowly against stone walls, slick with moisture and something darker, more viscous. The familiar whispers grew to a deafening roar, a symphony of voices that seemed to tear at the fabric of my sanity. We followed the twisted passages deeper, guided by the faint glow of phosphorescent fungi and the pulsing beat I could feel more than hear. Every step took us closer to the heart of the labyrinth, the source of the terror. There, in a cavern vast beyond reason, we found it. A massive, writhing mass fused from flesh, stone, and roots. Its surface was alive with countless eyes, glowing dimly like dying stars in the gloom. The air around it pulsed with a chilling breath that carried the scent of earth, rot, and something older than time itself. It did not speak with words, but with feelings, A flood of emotions crashed over me: fear, sorrow, rage, and most of all, a desperate longing for release from its eternal prison. Mateo began chanting the ancient incantations, his voice steady but strained, the talismans glowing faintly in his hands. The creature writhed and pulsed, the cavern trembling with raw power as the ancient bonds held tight for a moment, then threatened to snap. The energy was overwhelming. It felt as if the very darkness might consume us both, swallowing our souls into the abyss. At that moment, I faced a terrifying choice: to stay and risk being lost to the darkness forever, joining the whispers and shadows beneath the city, or to flee, leaving Mateo and the creature behind, perhaps condemning us all to the endless nightmare beneath Lima. My feet moved on their own. The sound of my heartbeat thundered in my ears as I ran, breath ragged, lungs burning with desperation. Behind me, the whispers chased like vultures, the darkness reaching for me with grasping tendrils of shadow. I burst through the hatch into the fading light of dawn, collapsing onto the cold pavement as the city awoke around me, oblivious. But I knew the darkness had not left. It was patient, eternal, waiting beneath the streets, in the shadows, in the cracks of the earth, and now in me.
The city of Lima thrived above me, busy streets bustling with life, laughter echoing through narrow alleys, and the scent of fresh bread and roasting coffee drifting on the breeze. Yet despite all the noise, despite the vibrant life, I felt utterly alone, as if I were a ghost tethered between two worlds, the sunlit city above and the endless darkness beneath. Mateo never came back from that final descent. The last time I spoke to him, his voice was strained, desperate, a man fighting forces beyond comprehension. After I fled into the dawn light, my calls went unanswered. The phone lines, the emails, even messages sent through friends, everything fell silent. I want to believe he escaped the tunnels, that he found some way out, but a gnawing fear claws at my mind that the catacombs claimed him, body and soul, swallowed by the living darkness he sought to confront. Since that day, the shadows have followed me like a second skin. The whispers never truly stopped, soft murmurs that curl around the edges of my thoughts, persistent and patient. I hear them in quiet moments, when the world dims and the hum of life fades. Sometimes I feel cold fingers tracing along my spine, phantom touches that make the hair on my neck stand on end. Sometimes I catch the faintest scent of damp earth and rot, as if the tunnels themselves are breathing just beneath my skin. I left Lima, fled as far as I could, hoping distance would sever the connection. But the darkness doesn't respect borders or miles. It has rooted itself inside me, an unyielding presence, a living nightmare that wakes with me and sleeps never. At night, when the city's lights dim and silence settles, I close my eyes, and I'm there again, beneath the city streets, in the pulsing tunnels, the walls throbbing like a wounded heart, the unblinking eyes watching from the shadows. The whispers call to me, not with malice, but with a haunting invitation. Come back. And in those moments, I wonder, when will the darkness finally claim me? Because shadows never truly fade. They wait, patient and eternal, lurking in the cracks between worlds, in the corners of our minds. I live with that truth now, a truth I can never escape.